Get up to the top here. All right. Some Republican political figures are dead set on making this election about not just abortion, but also IVF and even birth control. It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Meanwhile, The Economist says young women are more likely than ever to be liberal. Ravi and I are two wild and crazy guys who are eager to discuss these findings. In the world of Trump legal, we have the DOJ going over the head of a trial judge in Florida, while in New York, the federal judge has told Trump to keep certain names out of his mouth. If we have time, we'll also get into the latest polling and finance numbers when it comes to Biden versus Trump. Finally, we'll be joined by Ken Harbaugh to talk about the new MeidasTouch documentary Against All Enemies, which explores why some veterans have joined extremist groups. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who vote for progress in every election and want to convince their conservative friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54.
All right. Well, Jason, yesterday I had this discussion with a conservative on the Lost Debate podcast where we were looking at some data that we'll talk about in a second about how young men are more conservative than young women by pretty significant margins. And he asked me, he's like, what do you think is behind this phenomenon? And I actually think this clip that you sent me this morning from Charlie Kirk might help explain a little bit about what's going on here. Let's go to this clip.
A lot of them are on birth control too. And birth control really screws up female brains, by the way. Every single one of you need to make sure that your loved ones are not on birth control. It increases depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. Birth control is the #1 most prescribed medication for young ladies under the age of 25. They will give young ladies birth control for pimples, for acne, to control their moods, their period. It is awful. It's terrible. And it creates very angry and bitter young ladies and young women. That bitterness then manifests into a political party that is the bitter party. I mean, the Democrat Party is all about bring us your bitterness and, we'll give you free stuff. It's like we'll trade you, bitterness for stuff, essentially. That's like the Democrat Party.
He's got us nailed, Ravi.
It's a strong sales pitch for the Republican Party. Yeah, I mean, look, what's interesting is, and in that conversation I had yesterday, my friend Steven, the conservative dude, was like, we're in the context of young men. He was like, young white men are the only constituency. This is his argument that Democrats don't show compassion for. That was his argument. And I laughed when he said that. And I was like, it's a funny point. I kind of thought about it since. And I was like, well, the flip could be true, which is the Republican Party, who has this pull up your bootstraps mentality about nearly everybody, right? Mm-hmm. They seem to have this special level of care for, young white men, right? And actually, we're going to spend the second half of this podcast talking about the radicalization of that group. And actually, I think Ken and his team showed a lot of empathy for people who, I think it takes a lot of effort to show empathy for people who've resorted to violence, right? But you're a veteran. You at least come from a common place from a lot of the people who've decided to go a different way. So I actually do think we've extended that empathy. But I'm thinking to myself, this idea, remember the sort of cling to your guns comment, mm-hmm. right? I think that was Obama. Or the deplorables, which is mm-hmm. Hillary, right? Somehow, we're elites if we use language like that, but they can say we're bitter, the party of the bitter people. It's literally the same language.
Yeah. The Republican Party, and I guess in some cases the Democratic Party too, but the Republican Party has a history of not examining why people are choosing not to vote for them, but instead assigning to those people poor character as an explanation for why they don't support them, right? So the Republican Party, somebody like Charlie Kirk, they look at young women, and instead of doing self-examination and saying, well, perhaps the reason that so many young women in America are gravitating away from Republicans is that we keep trying to control their bodies. We keep, opposing efforts to make it so that they get paid the same for the same work. We keep opposing efforts to protect them from violence. Instead of doing that self-examination, Charlie Kirk looks at it and says, well, it must be the pills they're taking that make it. It just makes, they're just bitter. And that's why it's the equivalent of if you're a performer of any kind and you have a bad show and you just walk out and say, well, it wasn't me. It was a bad audience. And it's pretty rare that any sort of performer really achieves any kind of success with that attitude. But if you think about it, they do it with other folks too, right? They do it with young people. Generally, they've done it for a very long time with people of color in this country, right? Well, the reason they don't support us is because they're lazy, because they want, it's actually the same argument, right? They want free stuff. The same thing Charlie Kirk just said. It's never a self-examination. And I would say that there are times probably when the Democrats have been guilty of this. Right? I would say after 2016, there was, in some cases, a lot of analysis as to why we lost a lot of voters we used to get. But there are parts of the party that even today just want to write off white men and say, well, you know, anybody who chose to vote for Trump, they're just racist at their core and they're not gettable. And that's like what this whole show is about saying, well, actually, we got to try and bring those people back into the fold.
Right. And the data I alluded to is from The Economist, and they looked at 20 rich countries and found that 2 decades ago, there was little difference between young men and women, 18 to 29-year-olds, on a self-reported scale of 1 to 10, about, from very liberal to very conservative, but found that the gap has grown pretty significantly, where young men are just 2% more likely to say they're liberal than conservative, whereas young women are 27% more likely to say that they're liberal than conservative, the 27 percentage gap. This gap is roughly twice as large as the gap between people with and without a college degree. So that's how powerful this is. That's massive.
It also sounds like it's kind of beginning to mirror the generations that preceded them in terms of the gender gap politically, which is too bad from our point of view, right? Because the hope has been that, well, the millennial generation and Generation Z are going to be overwhelmingly progressive. And it sounds like, you know, the fact that young men in the poll are still 2% more likely to be liberal than conservative means that as a rule, they are more liberal than, you know, their fathers and their grandfathers. But it is kind of history repeating itself.
Well, interestingly, they're not. So what's fascinating is they looked at this data and compared them.
Oh yeah, because it's
men.
across. It's not just white men, right?
They look
Yeah.
at them older men versus
Yeah.
young men. The younger men are way more likely to identify with statements like the feminist movement went too far and yada yada yada. And part of what the Economist was trying to figure out is like, well, what's going on here? And there are kind of a couple of theories. The theory that the Economist posits is, well, the young men are kind of squarely in the middle of these debates in a way that's more tangible for them. Like they're fighting for jobs, and they're also part of this phenomenon of, you know, the sort of, not only has the sort of education gap been eliminated between men and women, but women now are much more likely to have a college degree than men, and much more likely to be proficient in reading and math. And so what the Economist posits is, well, maybe part of it is that the young men are a little bit more squarely within this fight. My theory could also be that, you know, the older you get, the more likelihood that you'll have a daughter. And if you have a daughter, you're probably less likely to answer on a survey that you think that we've been a little too nice to women. You know, like that's my theory.
Or not to mention, just simply by getting married, right?
Yeah.
I mean, by you know, having the success of a woman like affect you, right? Like that's long been the theory about one of the best ways to advocate for instance, equal pay has been to make the case to men whose wives are working, which is the majority of married men at this point in America. And so, yeah, it does make sense that that's one of the ways, because it is counterintuitive to what people usually say, that as you age, you're supposed to get more conservative. However, if that's still the case, that's even scarier, right? If young men in America are more likely to be conservative than their fathers and their grandfathers, and it holds that they're going to be more conservative as they age, well, then that is bad with regard to getting those men to vote the way we want them to.
Yeah, and it's an international survey, which is fascinating. So this is not just an American phenomenon. They actually spent a chunk of the article interviewing Polish young men and women, and some of the things they say is fascinating. It makes you at least realize we're not alone, like the way that young men and young women talk about each other across the pond.
Well, let's not close the segment without going back to point out just how ridiculous what Charlie Kirk is saying. It's like,
Yeah.
for a moment, let's go ahead and let's not let him slip by, right? That he's sitting there telling people birth control is bad because it can lead to depression and anxiety. Let me tell you something else that can lead to depression and anxiety, and that is giving birth before you're prepared to give birth, like being responsible for a child when you're not ready to do that in your life, can certainly lead to depression and anxiety, which is kind of the point here.
Yeah, and it was a couple of years ago now, we had a podcast about this subject. Men can take on more responsibility here for birth control in many different ways. And so
Yes.
I fully expect that the rest of that clip was Charlie Kirk saying, now men, let's take more responsibility for this. I'm sure that's what he was saying.
Yes, I'm sure he's in favor of preemptive vasectomies.
Yeah. And but that plus a lot of other things, right? There are other ways that men can be more responsible players here. We don't need to go into it. It's not that podcast, but
Yeah.
I'm just sure I want to give him his due. I'm sure that's what the rest of that speech was about. All right. Let's get to Trump legal. Where is it? No, it's not there. There it is. All right. Bunch of things going on right now. None of them great, Jason. Trump posted a $175 million bond, according to the court filing. Remember, they kind of lowered the bar for him a week ago. This is a bond that he posted with a Los Angeles-based group called Knight Insurance. The filing didn't specify which assets Trump used as collateral. And there's a lot of attention as to, well, what's going on here? How is he able to do this? Who is this group that covered for Trump? And did he actually put up enough assets?
Yeah, I'm gonna guess no. Just on pattern of practice. And but big win for him. I mean, he's able to put up the bond, which means he's able to appeal.
Well, it is worth paying some attention to this group. So the only group that was willing to give him a loan was owned by this guy called the King of Subprime Car Loans, Don Hankey. He also owns Knight Specialty Insurance Group, which is a group that underwrote the bond. He has been a Trump supporter. In 2022, that financial institution refinanced more than $50 million of Trump's loans on Trump Tower and Trump Doral, Miami. He has been, he's a Trump supporter. And, at a certain point, people need to start scrutinize these as potential campaign contributions.
Let me tell you something that definitely exists. And that is Mr. Hankey on his desk, or maybe in the notes section on his phone, has a top 5 countries to which he would like to be an ambassador. I'm telling you, like, that's a thing that I would bet lots of money. If I had $175 million, I would bet $175 million that exists. It has been written down somewhere.
Yeah. Well, Trump just seems to catch one good break after another, but one, at least the only sort of reasonable legal thing that seemed to happen this week was that in New York, the judge expanded the gag order against Trump. And now this gag order is going to cover family members of Bragg, the district attorney in Manhattan, the judge himself. This was after Trump targeted the judge's daughter repeatedly on social media over her work for a group involved in Democratic politics. Trump was upset about this. His lawyers said it threatened his First Amendment rights. I can imagine that most defendants aren't allowed to attack judges and their families personally. That's my guess.
Yeah, you think like if you're in trouble for, I don't know, like some sort of white collar crime or even like breaking and entering, that other judges are like, it is totally fine that you went on social media and posted like pictures and where to find my child and how they're actually responsible for you getting charged with breaking and entering. Yeah, no, this is just like treating him like anybody else. The question, of course, is going to be when he inevitably violates the gag order, whether they can do anything about it.
Yeah.
Which we're going to find out the answer to that. I don't know.
Well, okay. on the sort of theme of Trump catching many breaks, I mean, it's hard to count the amount of breaks he's caught in all of these different cases that he has. One of the ultimate breaks he caught was that Judge Aileen Cannon down in Florida was the one presiding over his documents case. She was already smacked down by the appeals court early on in this process. Ever since then, observers have been kind of watching skeptically as that case has very slowly made its way through her courtroom. And this week, I think it became clear that she's not an honest broker. And I don't want to like get bogged down in the legalese here, but essentially what happened is Jack Smith has been, making pleadings before the court, basically saying that Cannon is basically using a completely fraudulent interpretation of the law that's pre-cooking the case and doing it through jury instructions. So basically, she asked the lawyers on both sides to indicate how they would handle two sets of jury instructions. I won't go into them, but basically both of them, the sets of jury instructions are wrong legally in ways that give Trump an out before the trial even starts. And Jack Smith is saying, look, I will appeal this immediately. This is ridiculous. And also, little notice is the fact that we're not at the jury instruction phase of this trial. So it's really weird that Cannon is going there now. And it all feels like a huge delay tactic. Like all of this, like even an appeal helps Trump because everything delays this trial.
Well, first, for anybody watching or listening who's not familiar with jury instructions and why they're so crucial, is that it's literally like after the jury has heard all the evidence, after both sides have rested, after closing arguments, before the jury is sent back to the jury room to deliberate and to come back with a verdict, they're instructed on how to arrive at a verdict and how to weigh the evidence by the judge. That's what jury instructions are. So they are in pretty much every case, whether civil or criminal. I'm sure in some criminal cases it's very straightforward, but in civil cases, certainly that I've been involved in, there is a lot of back and forth between the lawyers over how they want the judge to instruct the jury, because this is how the judge says to the jury, here is how you are supposed to examine these facts in determining whether this count is guilty or not guilty, or liable or not liable. So think of it like a ballot question, right? Like when you go to vote on a referendum, it's a huge deal who got to write the question that appears on the ballot, right? Like when I was Secretary of State, that was the reason everybody was fighting so hard over the Secretary of State's office, and still is because in Missouri, the Secretary of State authors the question that is put to the voter. And often if you can shape the question, sadly, you can shape the answer. Well, that's why this is such a big deal, right? Is that this is when the jury goes back to decide after they've heard all the evidence, this is how the judge is going to instruct them. This is how they're going to shape, how Cannon will shape the question for them to answer. So it's a huge deal. And yeah, I do think it is odd that it is already being, maybe this is normal in federal criminal trials, and I don't know it. In my experience, this was submitted to the judge before trial, but it wasn't really until just prior to closing arguments that we would get into it between the two lawyers arguing to the judge about what we want the jury instructions to actually say. So it does seem early to me.
Yeah, and people could read the fine print here. Essentially, what these instructions would do is tell the jury that Trump was legally allowed to take these like classified documents home under both of the statutes, which is not the law. He wasn't allowed.
The way that the defense wants it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just very odd. Well, okay. 2024, some updates here. Trump raised $65.6 million in the month of March alone. And that means that the Trump campaign and RNC ended the month of March with $93.1 million on hand. So this is a bit of a positive development. We talked about how they were running out of money. We don't know Biden's numbers yet, but we did know that in New York last week, they raised $25 million during a single fundraiser with Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, along with Biden. They had, in February, the Biden campaign and DNC raised $53 million and ended the month with $155 million on hand. And so I'll be interested to see how much they raised last month. But Trump's kind of picking up some steam here on his fundraising side of things. He's going to need them for his legal proceedings, but maybe he'll raise enough to also field a credible campaign.
Yeah, and again, I think we've pointed this out before, but the reason that I think people look at this at the presidential level and say, well, it's not going to matter. I mean, everybody knows who Trump is. Everybody knows who Biden is. This is they're going to get their message out. And that's probably right. But the reason that this matters so much is because any campaign requires, as you and I know well, a lot of infrastructure. You have to actually have the people to go out and knock on the doors and bring the folks out. And you got to pay for like the flyers and all the stuff, there's so much stuff that you have to pay for, so much infrastructure, so much staff for the actual mechanics of campaigning and getting your vote out and focusing on the right places. And so, it's not just a matter of persuasion. Like, yes, the digital ads, the TV ads, that's all expensive, but it is the logistics. And that is where at this moment, it looks like, particularly given that he's going to have to spend so much on, trying to stay out of prison, that it does look like Trump is at a disadvantage. But I would caution people against, letting this get them too excited or relying on this or allowing you to, not work as hard if you're volunteering on the campaign. Because look, man, the way our campaign finance laws work now, they are so loose and so much stuff can flow through that the chances that at some point Trump is not going to come up with a bite dance type guy that is going to go and, fund a super PAC that's going to do it. I just think they're going to catch up, even if he has to spend all this money on legal fees. That's my guess.
Yeah, well, on more troubling news, the Wall Street Journal, which is one of the best polling groups out there, has one of the best track records, put out a poll with Trump leading in all but one battleground state. So in 6 of 7 states that they polled, which were the most competitive states in 2020 in the last election, Trump is winning. He holds leads of between 2 and 8 percentage points in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, and North Carolina. The only state that has Biden ahead is Wisconsin, where he is ahead by 3 points. In every state in the survey, negative views of Biden's job performance outweigh positive views by at least 16 points, with a gap of more than 20% in 4 states. Trump, on the other hand, earns an unfavorable job review for his time as president in only Arizona. Otherwise, he has positive reviews. I would say this is not good.
Yeah, that is surprising that out of all those, it's only Arizona. No, it's not good. A grain of salt is that nobody really knows if polling works anymore. I'm not sure that. Well, look, I don't think polling works anymore, but it works well enough that this should mean that we absolutely have to be careful. Don't take anything for granted here. Like, run like we're behind, because according to nearly every poll, we're behind.
Yep. And I think one last piece here, and I know, audience, I know I'm doomsaying today, but one last final piece of bad news is Nebraska traditionally is a state where, like Maine, there are electoral votes up for grabs that you could win based on certain pockets of the state. And Democrats have traditionally picked up an electoral vote in Nebraska, as Republicans have picked up an electoral vote in Maine's northern congressional district. And Trump and the governor of Nebraska have now signaled that they're going to be pushing the legislature to change that to a winner-take-all system. This could take an electoral vote off the table, and that could be a decider. Like, this could be the difference between Biden getting over the hurdle for electoral votes or not. Like, in a lot of scenarios, this electoral vote could be a difference maker.
And just before we went live here, Salty told me that the breaking news was that a member of the Nebraska legislature that's a Democrat has announced that they're becoming a Republican, which probably is enough to look at it and say they're probably going to be successful in this. Now, the Nebraska legislature is a unicameral legislature that technically they don't run on party, but everybody knows who the Democrats and who the Republicans are. So I think now, I guess the question will be, let's see, we have a Democratic governor in Maine. I can't remember if the legislature is a majority Democratic legislature. I don't think they have enough of a majority to get this done there to balance it out. But that would be the question, right?
Yeah, and I could be wrong about this. I vaguely have the sense that we do better in Nebraska's district than they do in Maine. But
oh, that's right, because I think Biden won all of Maine last time.
I think so. Whereas I do think we tend to pick up the Nebraska vote, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it's Omaha.
Yeah, but yeah, so this sucks.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So, okay, well, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about more stuff that sucks. So stay tuned.
But we'll do it and make it fun.
Yeah, we'll do it and make it fun. We'll talk to Ken Harbaugh about his wonderful documentary when we get back. This episode is sponsored by Rhone. If you're like me, you understand the pains of finding what to wear. Most clothes are uncomfortable. They may be too tight. They never, actually fit your size because, a lot of us are not exactly small, medium, large, extra large. We're complicated. Sometimes when you find something you like, you can only wear it for a few hours before that important meeting or dinner, and then you have to change it into something else. And everyone wants to dress their best. You want to look good at all times. And frankly, it's a confidence booster. So here's the deal. Men's closets were due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man, and here's why. Rhone helps you get ready for any occasion with the commuter collection, which offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, quarter zips, and polos. You never have to worry about what to wear when you have the Rhone commuter collection. And here's some anecdote. I'm wearing my Rhone pants right now. And last week I was at a wedding. I wore my Rhone button-down shirt to the wedding at a formal wedding, and I will also wear it tomorrow when I just go into a coffee shop to have a meeting. It's that versatile. So it's time to feel confident without the hassle. With Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the products. It's that easy. Yeah, I actually not so neatly folded that shirt in my bag for the wedding, and I was able to take it out, and automatically I was able to put it on. It looked like I had ironed it, but I didn't. It's an inside secret between us. So with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll also be smelling fresh and clean all day. On top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can dish the dry cleaner all together. We're on the move a lot, and the Rhone commuter collection has never let me down. The versatility and overall comfort of the collection is undefeated. I absolutely love it. And even after I wear it all day, I feel super fresh because that Gold Fusion anti-odor technology. At that wedding, I was dancing up a storm, wore it, no problems. So the commuter collection can get you through any work day and straight into whatever comes next. So head to Rhone.com/majority and use the promo code majority to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to RHONE.com/majority and use the code majority. It's time to find your corner office comfort.
Typical children's vitamins are basically candy in disguise, filled with 2 teaspoons of sugar, unhealthy chemicals, and other gummy junk growing kids should never eat. That's why Hiya was created, the pediatrician-approved superpowered chewable vitamin. While most children's vitamins are filled with 5 grams of sugar and can contribute to a variety of health issues, Hiya is made with 0 sugar and 0 gummy junk, yet it tastes great and it's perfect for picky eaters. Hiya fills in the most common gaps in modern children's diets to provide the full body nourishment our kids need with a yummy taste they love. Formulated with the help of nutritional experts, Hiya is pressed with a blend of 12 organic fruits and veggies, then supercharged with 15 essential vitamins and minerals, including vitamin D, B12, C, zinc, folate, and many others to help support immunity, energy, brain function, mood, concentration, teeth, bones, and more. It's non-GMO, vegan, dairy-free, allergy-free, gelatin-free, nut-free, and everything else you can imagine. Hiya is designed for kids of all ages and sent straight to your door so parents have one less thing to worry about. It's also fun to say, Hiya. As you know, I'm a father, and I'm always on the lookout for the best possible vitamins for my child to take. I'm so happy I've come across Hiya Health. The ingredients are amazing, and I don't have to worry about sugar or gummy junk because Hiya Health is made without that stuff, and it's still able to keep that great taste. We've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you must go to hiyahealth.com/majority. This deal is not available on the regular website, so go to hiyahealth.com/majority and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. All right. Ken Harbaugh is a former pilot in the U.S. Navy, a nonprofit founder and executive. He also hosts the podcast Burn the Boats, Medal of Honor, and Heroes in Their Own Words. He's here to talk about a new documentary that he's produced with MeidasTouch. It's called Against All Enemies. Let's start by looking at a clip.
3, 2, 1.
Today, domestic terrorism is the greatest terrorist threat facing the United States.
I hope that people are f***ing scared, because being scared motivates people.
This is how countries fall apart.
Oh my God!
I could see a civil war.
If you're not armed, you're dog meat.
And this fight that's far from over, and it may never be over.
Okay, and continuing in this super uplifting episode, Ken, thanks for being here, man.
It's great to be here, guys.
We appreciate it. Now, Ravi and I don't think either of us have had a chance to see this yet. It is clearly about extremism, but how about we just give you the floor for 30 seconds to 60 seconds here and tell us more about it.
You got it. Well, we have clearly struck a chord. We're number 1 on the Apple charts in the documentary category, number 11 overall. We just lapped. There we are, 12. We're creeping up on Oppenheimer. We just passed Barbie and Dune. But I think that's bad news disguised as good news, because Americans are terrified about what's happening, especially when it comes to extremism and the involvement of some really well-trained, really experienced veterans joining groups like the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys. January 6th was the starting point for my involvement in this project, but these movements look at January 6th as a dry run, and they are gearing up for 2025, and we need to be on guard.
And Ken, you had like incredible access to these groups, and I saw in an interview that you guys did that basically you chalk it up to the fact that these guys were like, they're kind of proud of their ideology. They're not necessarily hiding it. You have been involved in Democratic politics. Was that not an obstacle for you guys? Like, they didn't look you up and say, "Oh, who is this liberal trying to get me to, say the wrong thing?"
Well, we told them that we would let them speak their minds, and we would present their view, and we would, balance it with people on the other side and with expert perspectives. And I think one of the most striking and alarming aspects of this entire project was just how sincere the devotees of these movements are. So many of them believe with every fiber of their being that they're the ones on the right side of the Constitution. They're the ones on the right side of history. And for me, that's a sign that we need to be thoughtful about where we place the moral burden. And I'll grant you that the people who participated in the insurrection need to be held accountable. I'm glad they're going to jail. But then I look at those who provoked them from a safe distance, the Josh Hawleys and J.D. Vances and Eric Greitenses of the world, Josh Hawley fist pumping them, urging them to the barricades, and then running like hell when things got hairy. I think we haven't done nearly enough to hold those people accountable.
So you did this with Sebastian Junger, right? Who,
That's right.
If people aren't, he's one of my absolute favorites as far as authors and journalists, and so that in and of itself, I mean, in addition to your involvement, is a huge stamp of approval on it. What I'm curious about, and again, this is I haven't seen it yet question, but what's your where would you attribute these veterans who you talk to who are involved in this extreme sort of activity? How much of it would you owe to, okay, they've come out of the service and they're looking for a place of belonging? And then how much of it is, and I'm going to make this a long question because I'm going to provide this preface for context, is that I'm frequently, people who were never in the military will ask me, why are so many veterans conservative or even extreme? And what I always say is like, look, you have to keep in mind that the military is a workplace that is disproportionately drawing upon people who are of a conservative demographic. It's an overwhelmingly male workplace that disproportionately draws from the South and the Midwest. So I guess my question is like, of the people you talk to, how much of it would you analyze them and say, okay, that is because they were still looking for a place of belonging and they were misguided and fell into the wrong place? And how much of it is maybe they were heading in that direction regardless because that's how they were raised?
I think it's mostly the former. I think the demographic explanation can only explain part of it. I mean, we profile the leader of the New York Proud Boys. Doesn't really check the boxes that you described, but he does check the box, as does almost everybody drawn into this movement, of someone looking for a sense of community and camaraderie, and most importantly, a sense of mission. And you got to hand it to these organizations. They provide that. They do it really, really well. They give these lost former service members the chance to be part of something bigger than themselves, the chance to join a brotherhood. The problem is that the mission that they give them is undermining democracy. And it's incumbent upon us, it's incumbent upon society to do a much better job at providing alternate avenues for these veterans to find that sense of camaraderie and belonging and purpose. Veterans for Responsible Leadership is a great example of this. Team Rubicon is another one. Those organizations are out there, but they need more support.
And when we look ahead, what are the, we all know the damage that some of these groups have done in the past, but what can you glean from their sort of future plans, like the next couple of years?
Yeah, well, this is another really alarming aspect of the story. We interview Kathleen Ballou and other experts who look at January 6th, and they look at the data, they look at the traffic on these far right websites, and the verdict is in. These organizations look at January 6th as a massive success. It was a massive success in that it showed what a small handful of people could accomplish. It was a massive success in that people have joined these organizations in the wake of January 6th in droves. Membership in extremist organizations has actually gone up, even though the overall number of organizations has decreased, but that's only because of consolidation. And it was a massive success in that the president of the United States, the former president, the one who name checked the Proud Boys from behind a presidential podium, is now calling people who beat up cops and tried to stop the peaceful transfer of power martyrs and hostages.
So what do we do about this, right? You kind of alluded to Team Rubicon and other organizations that are trying to make sure that there is a sort of a spiritual and emotional landing place, so to speak, for folks who come out of the military. And particularly as we end this period of 20 years of war, this is something I think about all the time. Your partner in this, Sebastian Junger, wrote not only the best book on this subject, but I think probably one of the best books of the last 20 years, Tribe, which is about this issue of, what it's like to come home to a society where you haven't had mandatory service. People don't understand your experience, and you're looking for that sense of belonging. So in the film, without giving anything away, in the film, do you sort of get to a point where you prescribe how to go forward?
I mean, the first step is awareness, right? The first step is understanding the scope of the problem, just how effective the disinformation campaign being directed towards these veterans is. And it's being directed. There is a reason veterans are targeted and singled out for recruitment. A lot of the energy behind those campaigns comes from overseas nefarious actors. The first thing we have to do is understand the severity of the threat. At the end of the day, the only thing in my experience that is going to pull people back from the brink, pull people out of these organizations, it's not a podcast. It's not a fact sheet. It's not a bunch of charts dispelling the lies that drew them in the first place. It's conversations with loved ones, people who care about them. We feature Chris Goldsmith in the film, who just has a fascinating story of being on that path, almost being drawn in to these organizations in a very extreme way. And it was buddies of his at a community college who saw him. It was military folks, veterans, who saw him in class with his hoodie pulled over his head, and they knew what they were looking at, and they cared about him enough to pull him aside and invite him into their circle, an organization that channeled his disaffection and his desire to be part of something into good, as opposed to letting him be drawn into these organizations. In terms of like a prescription for scaling that, I mean, Stan McChrystal talks about national service as a potential option. I think there are a lot of things we can do, but step one is getting the truth out there about these movements.
Yeah.
And
Oh, go ahead, Robbie.
I was just gonna say, well, you talk about the truth, right? Like, I could be wrong about this, but often what happens when people are radicalized is the people recruiting them will build on some pre-existing truth and then add a bunch of lies to it. Is there anything that you found in talking to these folks where you're like, okay, there's a starting point of something? Maybe it was their experience in the military, maybe it was the way they were treated, maybe it was just the makeup of some of the campaigns that they were required to undertake. Maybe it was the lack of support when they got home. Were there any like sort of foundational truths that you found across the board with a lot of the people you were talking to that were exploited by the people recruiting them?
I think Chris is an instructive example here because his breaking point came literally the day before his second deployment to Iraq. The first time he was deployed as a 19-year-old, completely unprepared for what he was being asked to do. He was tasked with documenting mass graves, and it left an indelible impression on him. It messed him up. And he told himself, I'm not going back. I'm not doing that again. And the night before his second deployment, he tried to take his own life in a military cemetery surrounded by buddies of his that didn't make it back alive. And instead of waking up surrounded by a chaplain and a mental health counselor, instead of waking up from that suicide attempt surrounded by people who cared about him, he woke up handcuffed to a gurney under arrest in a military hospital. If that kind of experience isn't enough to send someone over the edge, to make them angry about how the country treated them, I don't know what is. And that's what happened to Chris. He spiraled. He was looking for a way to exact revenge. He felt betrayed. And I think a lot of vets feel that sense of anger. Maybe they can't articulate it as clearly as Chris was able to, but there is a sense of anger and in some cases betrayal. And groups like the Oath Keepers are really good at preying upon that.
It's funny, before you came on, Ravi and I started this episode by talking about young white men in this country being a group that that we sort of have the least empathy for as a society, and certainly on the left. And yet, a lot of what we're talking about right now is not to say that it's our fault, that it's anybody's fault other than the people who join the movement that can be held responsible, but one of the surest ways to make sure that people don't feel driven to find belonging in more nefarious places is for all people to feel that they belong. And so it's interesting that, we didn't intentionally set that conversation up to lead to this one, but what you're saying reminds me of something, and I may have told this story on the show before, but when I was in intelligence school before I deployed to Afghanistan, and there were not that, this was 2005. So there weren't 2005, 2006, there weren't that many people yet who had deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan. And they brought in an intelligence officer who had deployed, and he was briefing us on the makeup of a terrorist cell. And I mentioned this to say terrorism as a tactic, it sort of, in terms of recruitment and how it develops, it kind of doesn't change from one place to another. The ideology, the motivation may change, but at the end of the day, it all tends to look the same. Because I remember he showed us a diagram of a terrorist cell. There was like, here's the bomb maker, here's the spotter, here's the financier, here's the lookout guy, here's the trigger man. And he was like, okay, are you high speed new intelligence officers? How would you take them out? How would you take out this terrorist cell? And of course, we're all piping up with like, well, you got to go after this guy first, because, we're all thinking, as we would say in the military, kinetically. Yeah. Like, how do you end this terrorist cell via violence? Because that's what we were trained to do. And at the end of it, he's like, you're all wrong. He's like, get any one of these guys a good job. He was just like, if you put meaning in one of these essential people, essential to the operations of the cell, if you put meaning into their life, they won't do this anymore. And I think that still applies here.
Yeah, I think it absolutely does. I don't think I could state it better than that. And you referenced Tribe, the seminal book by Sebastian Junger, and he lays that out incredibly compellingly. When people have a sense of belonging and a sense of community, they don't resort to violent, crazy acts to try to recreate that or invent for themselves a sense of meaning in their lives. They already have it. If we can do a better job at providing that, I think we undercut the appeal of these movements.
And I think it's really important to emphasize here that what you're saying, and anybody who's maybe hears it the wrong way and would be skeptical of watching the film, what you're saying is not the military or the experience of being in the military predisposes people to extremism. What you're saying is that the experience of exiting the military and losing. Now, obviously, there can be trauma, as you know, I would be the first to tell you, in the experience of being in the military, but it is a trauma in and of itself, often the experience of leaving the military. Like you've experienced that as well, taking off the uniform for the last time and looking in the mirror and saying, okay, now where do I fit in this world? And how do I associate? How do I connect with these people around me who I don't really understand now?
100%. And that's half of it. The other half is the fact that veterans are explicitly targeted
Yeah.
by these groups because they're effective. It's the same reason there was this Rand report that came out around the time we were interviewing some of these people for the film. And it pointed out, or maybe Chris Goldsmith had this commentary about it, that Fortune 500 companies target veterans for recruitment as well, for essentially the same reason. When they get a hold of a mission, they tend to pursue it. People follow them. They have a sense of commitment to the organization of which they're a part. So you combine that sense of loss that we experience when we leave the military, the need to belong to something again, with the deep cynicism of these groups that go out looking for them, and you have a perfect storm.
All right. Well, Ken, tell people again where they can find it and any other information that you want to put out.
Absolutely. Apple TV, Amazon. I think if you Google it now, it's the top hit. And reviews make all the difference. I think it's still got 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, but as you both well know, the trolls are about to show up. So we need all the support we can get, especially from the Midas Mighty community and buttressing our numbers. Amazon, Apple TV, Against All Enemies. Or go to againstalllenemiesfilm.com, because the other thing we're doing is trying to get veterans who want to see the film for free the opportunity to do that. We have a campaign underway that you can click through at againstalllenemiesfilm.com, because that is the most critical audience. We want everyone to see it, but we especially want those veterans who are second guessing the path that they're on, or who have a buddy that they really care about. We want them to see it and be able to use this film as a conversation starter.
And before you go, Ken, while we're at it, I will just, go ahead and mention the podcast that you host. Because I will mention, first of all, as I've texted you before, the Heroes in Their Own Words podcast is so great. It is for anybody who's interested in, for lack of a better term, war stories. What's great about it is it's not conversations with veterans. It's just the veterans answering questions, but you don't have to hear the questions. It's just veterans from World War II, from Vietnam, just talking about their experience. And it's really pretty remarkable. I listened to most of those episodes.
I feel incredibly lucky to be able to host that show. We have archives actually going all the way back to World War I of interviews with veterans about their experience in uniform. And the whole idea behind Warriors in Their Own Words
Warriors
is just they're all heroes to me. It's just to let them talk, right? I do the contemporary interviews with the OIF and OEF veterans, with some Vietnam vets. I got to interview my dad who flew Phantoms in Vietnam.
Wow.
But I'm not part of the final product, because the whole idea is to let these warriors tell their own stories and present the unvarnished, unsanitized truth of what we have asked them to do.
Yeah, I remember when I did the show, you interviewed me, and then when I listened to it, I didn't hear your voice at all. But it ended up really working. It's much more effective. It's very cool. It feels much more intimate. Yeah. So anyway, I commend you on it. All right. Well, thanks for joining us. We're going to wrap up here in a second, but we'll let you go.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Ravi. Love doing this. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks, man. All right, Ravi. What's
happening?
going on? Yeah, what's going on, man?
Well, other than Diggs getting traded, which just happened in the middle of this
Yeah.
podcast, I have lots of people inundating me about questions. This is a Buffalo Bills wide receiver. Nobody cares.
I care. We were texting about it during the show.
The good thing is I don't acknowledge the existence of that team right now for the foreseeable future. So I don't have much to say about that. Otherwise, good. Just like hustling, back in New York, just shipping off projects, trying to get to the point where I think in 2 months I will have just shipped off most of the sort of big rocks I have on my plate so I can enjoy most of the summer. That's basically my world.
What's been going on with me is you were kind enough to send me the manuscript of your novel, which is not yet published, but it's great. I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I told you this, but my agent at CAA was let go the week before I sent her the manuscript, which is like an ultimate, which is quite a turn of events. So now I've got to figure that whole world out.
So if you're a literary agent out there,
if you're a literary agent, come find me. I think CAA will be fine, but now I just have a new agent, which means I have to rebuild the whole relationship in addition to having finished the novel. So now the real work begins, which is just crazy timing, but they still, the way it works is they still represent you. But it certainly was a bummer of a development, and she was really good. And she had been supporting this project for a couple of years now. So,
well, it's really good. And I'm looking forward to finishing it and then being able to ask you like which aspects are autobiographical. I mean, there's some that clearly are. And so that's going to be fun. So I'm excited about it. So, all right. Well, anyway, look for that, folks, in like 2 years. When that comes out, or a year or whatever. But all right. Thank you, everybody. You can find us on social media. He's at Ravi M. Gupta on everything. I'm at Jason Kander on everything. Please leave a 5-star review. Thank you to the Midas Mighty. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.